My name's Eli Delaney, and I have the honor of meeting some pretty cool people. These are the entrepreneurs, the artists, the creatives, the game changers that are making a positive impact in the people that they meet. And I'm a firm believer that the people that you meet can get you anywhere you want to go. And this show is my way of sharing them with you. It's my way of also helping you meet cool people. Welcome back, everybody. Eli here. And today on Meet Cool People, I have a more recent friend. We connected at the Badass Business Summit just about a month ago. This is Craig Andrews, and he is a U.S. Marine turned electrical engineer, a mobile phone designer turned marketer, and multi-best-selling author. In 2009, Craig launched his own company, which became Allies for Me. And this is where things get really interesting. In August of 2021, Craig ended up with 3 months in the hospital and 6 weeks in a coma when he nearly died. During that time, Craig's team ran Allies for Me without him, which is impressive just by itself. And nowadays, Craig shares the lessons from the ledge of death and how they apply to both marketing and in life. So, Craig, thanks so much for hanging out with us today.
Eli, it's a delight. I've been looking forward to this. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we had a couple of really cool conversations, like a real brief one at Babs. We got to know each other, and then we had a great call. Was it last week?
Something like
that. Yeah. And, it's so funny. Like when I find somebody who has the same kind of marketing mind that I do and the attitude around what we should be doing in our marketing the right way, it's such a rarity. That's like, okay, how is it that we both have been in business for so many years and not met each other yet? And that's kind of how I felt during our call. So it was good to get to connect with you. Glad to have you on the show today. So tell us a little bit more about how you got started in the marketing side of things.
Yeah, I learned the expensive way that engineering is not a field that rewards creativity. I wanted to create things, and I thought, who does that but engineers? So I went and got an engineering degree, and then got another. I have a master's in electrical engineering. Did well in school. Got a dream job out of college. Most electrical engineers are not designers, and I had a design job designing mobile phones when they were still kind of new.
Right. Wow.
And I did well at it, but it was really confining, and it's just not an environment that rewards creativity. And so I thought, let me move over and do marketing. And so I started marketing semiconductors for mobile phones. So I still used my degree.
Right. Okay.
And so it's kind of a nice first step. And I did that for about a decade until they started asking me to fly coach to Asia. And which I knew was coming. I knew that day would eventually come, but I just I'm not gonna. I mean, I loved when I went over there, but it was hard work. And on any Asia trip, you're losing 3 weekends: the weekend that you leave, the weekend that you come back, and the weekend that you're there.
Right.
And so, if you're doing that 4 or 5 times a year, you're chopping out a fair number of weekends in the year. And I was like, no, I'm not going to fly coach to give up. No, we're working on multi-million-dollar deals. Get me the business class ticket.
Yeah, at least business. I mean, that kind of trip. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when the contrast is when I first went into the industry, it was always business to Asia, but the company I worked for had a special deal with British Airways that if we bought a round trip business class ticket to Europe, they would upgrade the outbound leg to first class.
Okay.
And if you ever get a chance to fly British Airways first class, you should. It's pretty nice, all the way up to the departure lounge. You go into the first class. I'd usually fly out of Philly, and they had a first class lounge where you'd go in. They had white tablecloths, a dining room with white tablecloths, and you would be served surf and turf before your flight. And then you get on the flight, and they would say, Mr. Andrews, we know that you've already eaten. We can bring you more food if you'd like, or we can get you your sleeper suit. And I would always say, sleeper suit, please, which was basically like a set of sweats. Okay. They would hang up on hangers whatever I was wearing. and I put on these little sweats. And as soon as we took off, his seat was back, and I was sleeping all the way to England.
Nice. No, that sounds like a much better way to do things, definitely.
Yeah.
So tell me a bit about Allies for Me. What is it and where did the name come from for first of all?
So that's a great question that nobody asks. And the so when I left the semiconductor marketing world, I decided I was going to do something else, and I was working on a product. It was a type of social media slash um, kind of a networking slash wow, what's the Japanese words? Is it kanban? No, no, not kanban. It's where a group of companies come together and they work in unison. And I originally named that product Allies for Me, and I had artwork done and all that. Well, that never took off, and somebody started paying me to just help with their marketing. And so I was like, well, I kind of like the name, and I own the domain space, so I'm just going to take that and I'm going to call it my, you know, name of my marketing agency, because same thing, everybody needs an ally. And so that's where that came from. But the whole idea was of the original concept was create an environment where people could come find basically like referral partners, if you want, um, that frequently work together. So
Nice. Well, and I because I like the name. The name was just cool. When I've seen that, I was like, so what exactly does he do? When I first heard that, because I didn't know you were in marketing at the time. I just knew, you and I had met, and I saw the name, and I'm like, okay, what exactly is this? It was kind of cool. From a standpoint of what you do for your clients right now, kind of explain first off, what type of clients do you work with, and where do you stand out with them?
yeah, so my clients are usually in a really crowded or commoditized market where there's a lot of noise and it's hard for them to stand out. And they tend to have a high ticket service that takes a long time to close, that requires a high level of trust to close.
Mm.
And so that looks like a variety of things. Sometimes that looks like wealth management. Sometimes that looks like outsourced software development. It's looked like professional liability insurance for attorneys. It's just, higher end complex products where it can be hard to differentiate. And
Hmm.
so, like financial advisors or wealth managers, there's 450,000 financial advisors in the US, and they all do the same thing using basically the same tools.
Right.
And so, when it's really crowded like that, we're good at getting them to rise above the noise, and we make them irresistible, to their buyers. And we use the tools of Hollywood to do that.
Okay. So let's go down that a bit more, because I mean, in today's world, I find like just about everybody is in a crowded market. It really has gotten that to that point, because so many people jumped into, I can't rely on a job, or I don't want to work for somebody else anymore, and they jump out and do their own thing. But in every industry that I've seen, it seems like all of a sudden we have 10 times as many people in that particular space. I say that with the coaching world happened in 2020. The coaching space just blew up. And, anybody who's talked to me knows that I use the term is like so many people jumped in the coaching space. The problem is they shouldn't be coaching a T-ball team, let alone adults.
Yeah.
And the problem is, how do you differentiate? How do you stand out from that? So as we're coming into this more crowded world, for all of us, what are a couple of the basic things that we could be doing that will help us stand out above that crowd?
Yeah. So, what happens in the noise? People start saying, "Hey, let me tell you the nuanced differences of us. I hope you understand the nuances." And the reality is, they probably don't understand the nuances, and you're not going to capture enough of their attention when they go by. So, what we say is, when you can't differentiate on what you do, the differentiation is you. And so, it's about figuring out what your unique identity is. And in the same way that Hollywood writes characters, we write the characters of companies and we make them interesting. And so, Breaking Bad, some people love it, some people don't. But it was a brilliantly well written series where you find yourself rooting for some truly despicable people. Um, and that was by design. And obviously, I'm not advocating rooting for despicable people, but what drew you in was the magnetism of the characters. And those were very, very carefully written. And so, using the same tools, we can, you want to start thinking about what makes me unique, less about the company, more about you. And one element, let me throw this out, one element that's absolutely essential that most people leave out is you have to reveal a weakness, vulnerability, or flaw. If you think about any great TV series that goes multiple seasons or any great movie, the character, the main character, is a flawed person. Because guess what? We are all flawed. And when you do that, you build trust. It's counterintuitive, but when you reveal that weakness, vulnerability, or flaw, you actually build trust.
Okay, so that one I want to talk about more because I'm one that I don't like putting out the stuff as like that negative feeling. And so many of us live in that world. It's like, oh no, we want to see the positive things, which, ultimately, yeah, generally speaking, that's what we want because we want to put out these are all the successes we've had. But how do we put out a flaw that without it making us look like in a bad light, I guess is the right question. I'm not sure if that's the right way to ask the question, but I think this is something people need to be more intentional of how they can do it without it freaking them out and saying, I'm not going to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and they, just so you know, they still freak out. Even when I tell them, "Hey, this is what we're going to do," they still freak out.
Right. Okay. Okay. It's not just me.
Yeah, and it's an understandable fear. I get it. Um, but the thing is, there has to be something that humanizes you.
Hmm.
And so, let me start with Hollywood. The TV show House.
Hmm.
Gregory House, this brilliant diagnostician who was a little bit bad with people, but had this insatiable desire to solve problems.
Right.
And his weakness, vulnerability, or flaw was he was an opioid addict. You have a doctor in the hospital
Hmm.
who's addicted to the drugs he can prescribe.
Right.
But as you watch that show, if you were ever sick, you want him to be your doctor.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. No, I get
never
that.
mind that he's a drug addict.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you bring that up. There was something just came up about that same show the other day. Now I forget what it was, but it is interesting when you stop and think about that. And we see, people have flaws. Like you and I were just talking about the whole conversation related to people who have a back history of, legal issues. We'll just put them like that.
Yeah.
And what that happens, what that portrays in real life. And the reality is that, everybody's got something going on. Something has happened, good, bad, or indifferent. And the reality is how do we believe it? Because do we put that as a forefront piece as okay, this is why I won't buy from that person, or do we go okay, but their positives, the things that they are brilliant at, outweigh that piece?
Or that piece is not relevant. It's not
Okay.
relevant to the purchase decision.
Yeah. Okay.
So here's an example from a marketing standpoint. So we had a client that did offshore software development.
Hmm.
He was a Indian from South India, the state of Kerala, but he grew up in Dallas.
Okay.
And and so what we put at the very opening paragraph on his About Us page is read something like a foreign bird with a local walk is an Indian phrase for a person who is out of place and has learned to adapt. Some use that phrase to describe me. My name is a Syriac Malayan name that is common in South India, but I grew up in Dallas. Whether I'm walking in India or in Texas, I am a foreign bird. My life is a journey of discovering my local walk when everything else is out of place. He did not want to put that on his website because a foreign bird with a local walk is not a nice phrase in India,
Okay.
but it's a very real phrase that I
Hmm.
just happen to know. And but for him, we're telling immigrant stories.
Right.
Americans love immigrant stories; they sell every day.
Yep.
And you don't want your immigrant to come over here and be the snotty little kid in class that's busting the curve and and arrogant. You want them to be a little bit flawed.
Hmm.
And the flaw was this insecurity of, I'm not quite American, I'm not quite Indian, I'm just kind of in this in between space. And all of a sudden you start you're that creates compassion in the reader for them.
Right. Nice. No, that's a great story because, for me, I found one of the things for me personally, and this happened, I don't even remember how long ago, because it was when I still had my previous company, my web and graphic design agency, and there was a point where my partner at the time, she actually was talking to me like we did like basically it was the first time I took like a Myers-Briggs version type of
Mhm.
test for personality types. And the coach that I was working with that did these tests with everybody, they did it as a group format situation. And she put me into the analytical group. And for me personally, I feel more comfortable in what I like to call the warm and fuzzy group. These are the people that are much more empathetic, and for me, just for clarity, for everybody listening's sake, just to make it easier, four quadrants. I call them the alphas, the partiers, the analyticals, and the warm and fuzzies. That's how I call them.
Okay.
And when she put me in that category, I was like, that's not me, because these guys are all boring and stodgy. And I was really actually upset by the whole thing. And my partner finally looks at me. She's like, you come across as kind of stuffy. And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "You always show up in a suit and tie." Well, actually, I wasn't wearing a tie, but I was always in a suit. I always talk pure business. And she was like, "Nobody knows what you are like in real life." Like, for me, the couple things are like, they didn't know that I had a daughter. They didn't know that I'm a dog guy. They didn't know that I like blues music. All these other things that I never let out, and it really hit home for me. And when I finally was like, okay, I need to let this out a little bit, let people get to know the real me, my business tripled
Yeah.
because I let them know the real me. Now, I don't know if I necessarily call those flaws, but it was people got to know the real me. And that was a big hurdle for me to get over. But that's what I always tell people. And ever since that happened, I always tell people, like with my own clients, I'm like, personal brand is important. And that personal brand is you being you.
Yeah. Well, and here's a story as it affected me. And by the way, I can believe your business tripled. And it's not necessarily a flaw, but the flaws humanize us,
Hmm.
because we all have them. And
Right.
when we just show those, and maybe the flaws and insecurity, as was the case in my client. But here's one that hit me. So um, about a year after I got out of the hospital, or about a year after I went in the hospital, I went back for plastic surgery to have my mouth reconstructed because they mangled it all up, and
Hmm.
it was a mess. And so after surgery, I didn't shave because I didn't want to shave over scars. And all of a sudden, I realized I will never be able to grow hair across,
Mm.
this big strip on my upper lip. And I could always grow a decent beard.
Right.
And I moped around for about 3 weeks. And then one day I walked in my wife's office and I said, if I can't do something with this, I completely suck as a marketer. And so that was the day I decided I'm going to grow a goatee.
Okay.
I ordered new business portraits and had portraits taken. And I didn't think they understood. No, I wanted to feature this. I didn't want to hide it.
Right.
But it's it's something that's kind of quirky. People don't ask about it, which I wish they kind of would. It's kind of interesting, but it creates interest.
Right.
It creates interest.
Well, and there's a story behind it.
Yeah.
There really is a story behind it. No, that's interesting. And it is really, that kind of stuff is always fascinating when people, because we all suffer from our own insecurities over stuff like that.
Hmm.
Whether it's legit or not. Most of the time it's not near as legit as it really as we think it is. That scary stuff is not really that scary. But that is something that you can take things, and it's a great example of you being able to take something that might have been, was something you were worried about before, and turn it into a bit of your unique ability. I mean, what makes you stand out, because there is a story behind it, which I
Yeah.
think is great. Yeah.
Well, and there was a picture tied to my whole journey that for a long time I wouldn't show anybody. And I was talking to somebody one day on Zoom, and for some reason I just decided to show them that picture. And the first thing they said, they're like, "Holy cow, you look 20 years older in that picture." I'm like, "Yeah, thank you." And they were kind of they turned and they complimented, and I said, I just hide this photo. I don't show it to anybody. And they said, "Why?" And the photo is me of my first workout at Camp Gladiator after I got out of the hospital.
So,
And I was emaciated. I was in a wheelchair. I was on oxygen. And I looked like this old, to me, I saw when I looked at that picture, I was like, that guy looks old, pathetic, and weak. And I don't
mhm,
want people to see that.
right.
And he said, whoever I was talking to is, I see somebody who's bold.
Okay.
But I wanted to hide that.
Right. Yeah, that's a big one. What's really funny is when I think about that, as you're describing that, I'm looking at, yeah, especially when he said that you look 20 years older in that picture than you do now. To me, the first thing I think of is that is a great story of how far you've recovered since that whole situation.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, that's part of the good part of the journey, which actually leads me to another question. I was thinking about that as we're talking about all this stuff. You talk about using Hollywood frameworks and things like that to bring out people's story. How do we be careful about doing that, which we should be doing? I totally agree with it, without falling into the trap of the ever so overly used hero's journey that people, you can see it at 10 miles away. So I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do. Um and here's the truth. When I look at what I do, it is a hero's journey,
Mhm.
but I don't think people would look at it as kind of a cliche hero's journey.
Okay.
It um and part of the reason is you throw some stuff in that people would really rather hide. You know, the the foreign bird with a local walk. I mean, nobody really looks at that. When they read that story, it doesn't feel like the cliche hero's journey.
Right. Okay.
So when I write a an about us page for someone, I use a basic structure that came out of a book called "Stealing Fire from the Gods," and it was a basically a manual on how to write screenplays. And I was like, okay, how do I take these principles and condense it down to 800 to 1,000 words on an about us page? And and I think the key is when it becomes authentic. When it becomes authentic. And also, and you know what? I'm glad you asked that question because I don't think I had the answer perfectly clear in my head.
That's what
If
we that's
people,
why we throw little curveballs at you once in a while.
no, well, it's one of those things that you do and you don't realize you're doing it.
Mhm.
Um, you have to make people feel something. I would say when you're doing the clip, what I would call it more of a cliche hero's journey,
Mhm.
it's a recitation of facts.
Right.
When people, our better about us pages that we write, somebody actually feels something.
Mhm.
So in one of them, we talk about a guy who's leaving Roswell, New Mexico to try to find a new job. And he's sitting in the interview, and the HR director, instead of sitting at her desk, sits in the chair right next to him. and she starts scanning them up and down. And she asks, "Does this make you nervous?" And he says, "By a galactic measure, that was the toughest interview question of the day." And then she looked at me and she said, "You're in the wrong place." And do you see, do you feel what I'm talking about? It's about
Right.
making people feel something when they're sitting there picturing sitting in this chair right next to the HR director and they're scanning him up and down. I think we did a little alien theme in that story and said she scanned me from top to head like the aliens get scanned in some secret Roswell hangar. Um,
I love it.
but you're sitting there, you're picturing, you're feeling the stress of the situation.
Right.
And I would say that that's the difference because you know what? Hollywood does hero's journey every day. Their best movies are hero's journeys,
Right.
but nobody cares. Nobody complains about that because of what they make you feel while you're watching them.
Right. It doesn't feel as scripted, I guess is the right term for it. And that's why I'm really glad that you're sharing this stuff, because so many people, I've seen this over the last several years, they really focus on, I got to tell the hero's journey, and it's like it ends up being very clinical, and you
Yeah.
can see it a mile away. And that's why I wanted to ask that question, because I know you, as the expert of what you do, you could help people with that. Okay, how do we do this differently so it doesn't feel so scripted and so clinical?
Yeah. And that's where it really comes down is you have to make them feel like they're in the room.
Hmm.
As they're reading that, they should feel like they're in the room and they're walking that journey with you. And when they have that feeling, they're not worried about the script. They feel like they're a part of the action.
Right. Nice. I like it. Now, you, as we've been talking about this, you keep bringing up the about page, and that is something that I know I've heard you and I talked about this before. I have heard that the about page is actually the most viewed page on somebody's website, but we both know that's the page that usually gets thrown together last minute because we don't know what else to say and we need to put something up there. So, what are a couple of quick, simple formatting type of things that people should be putting on an about page to make it good?
Whew, I wish I could give you a simple answer to that because
Okay.
the direction I would give, the anything that I could package in simple directions, um, it would go back to kind of the clinical cliche and what have you. So I could say, well, you want to humanize yourself. Oh, okay. Well, I'll talk about my dog. And I'm like, okay, I love dogs. I love dogs. Wait, we're dog sitting right now. She may be walking around the background, but that's where it starts becoming a little bit cliche. And you see this, you know, it likes, I mean, it sounds like a bad, um, a bad profile on a singles app, well, I like dogs and walks in the park and, and, and all that.
So you're saying that if your about page reads like your Tinder profile, you're doing it wrong.
Right. Well, and it's a hard job. I
Hmm.
mean, it's a hard job to do that. Um, and so I don't have an easy answer. I mean, because when we do it, we spend about an hour and a half interviewing somebody,
Hmm.
then about an hour mapping out the strategy of what we're going to do,
Okay.
and then about another 4 or 5 hours writing.
Okay.
And I'm a seasoned writer. Most people
Right.
running their businesses are not, and that's not a
Right.
critique. That's just I should be because that's my job. But that's where it's really hard. I wish I could give you a simple thing, a simple answer to that. What I would say is avoid what I see on so many about us pages is some version of we were good until we became great. And that's just not very persuasive.
Okay.
Um, what I would what I would say is help people understand your why. Help people understand your why without sounding cheesy. And that's the hard part.
Yeah. But I think that's the golden nugget right there is if you can help people understand your why, that's what gets them to buy into you being the right choice for them.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't boil down to credentials. Nowadays, everybody's got whatever experience they need, and it really doesn't matter as much. There's certain things. Obviously, you want a doctor to be the best, right? It could be House, and he could still have an opiate problem, but whatever. But you still, what people want is people want to be able to connect and empathize with you and feel like you are a good person that they can trust. And I think that what you just said there with the, you know, share your why makes a big difference there, because that's a piece that so many people are missing, and
Yeah.
it does make a difference.
Yeah. And it has to be authentic. That's the thing. It has to be authentic.
Yeah. No, and I love that. And I love that one of the things that, I would recommend for people, and it's what you're doing, obviously, best choice, hire Craig and his team to help you with that piece. But south of that is that interview process. Have somebody interview you about your why, how you got started, because that's a good way to kind of, if you can turn around and listen to that recording and hear what you said, a lot of times you'll find there's a lot of stuff in there that you didn't even realize you were saying. And
Mhm.
I've done that before. It's like, especially like I get on like podcasts, or if I tell my story and stuff, I come back and I'll listen to them and I'm like, huh, I did say smart things. That's kind of cool. you know? So I think that that's a really big one that people should be looking at. And I'd like for you to repeat the name of that book, because I was going to ask you to bring that up as it was, and you mentioned it once, but go ahead and repeat it one more time for us.
Stealing Fire from the Gods,
Okay.
which surprisingly for a book about writing screenplays, it's not that well written of a book, but it does have a nice formula in it.
Nice. I love it. That is awesome. Very cool. So if there's any last minute things that you could give to anybody from a standpoint of how to tell their story more effectively, what would be one last nugget?
I would say that the things that scare you, the things that you try to hide, most of the time are the things that you want to feature.
Nice. I like it. Awesome. All right. So let's go ahead and wrap things up here. As we do with every show, there's two final questions. Last question is the easy one. That's how can people get a hold of you. But before that, this is the Meet Cool People show. And I like to ask every one of my guests, what do the words Meet Cool People mean to you?
For me, meet cool people means somebody who's interesting and authentic and has a story to tell.
Short, sweet, and to the point. I love it. Awesome. So, Craig, how can people get a hold of you if they want to reach out to you?
So, of course, I'm on LinkedIn, and or they can come to my website, which is alliesforme.com. That's spelled ALLIES, the number 4, ME.com. And we have ways of connecting there. So those are probably the two best things.
Awesome. Love it, my friend. Thank you for coming and hanging out today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a delight.
All right. For everybody else, get out there. Have an amazing week. As always, if there's anything I can do to help you out, reach out. Let me know. And that wraps up another Meet Cool People show. Now, if you like what you heard, be sure to give us a like, subscribe, or review so I can help introduce these amazing cool people to even more amazing cool people. And just remember, meeting cool people is just the beginning. You need to have a system in place to follow up with the amazing people that you meet. This is exactly what we do for our clients. Now, if you'd like to see if my team and I can help you, go to convertmoreclientsnow.com and check out the case study video to see exactly how we're helping our clients turn casual connections into cash clients for life. Again, go to convertmoreclientsnow.com and see how we can work together to turn you into a follow-up rock star.